Hello and good afternoon to everyone joining us from APAC today. Good morning to those of you who might be in Europe, the Middle East, or Africa. The topic for today's webinar is uncovering the APAC cyber threat landscape. My name is Daniel Pigeon. I do product marketing at Cyberint, and I'm the moderator for today's session. We have two really outstanding speakers with us today. We have Adrianne Chester Camat. He's a threat intelligence team leader at Cyberint. Adrianne has more than a decade and a half of experience in cybersecurity, including security operations, threat triage and analysis, reverse engineering, and more. So Adrianne is joining us from the greater Manila area today.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are. Thank you for being here.
All right, and we also have Akanksha Harjai. She goes by AK, and she's a security solutions engineer at Cyberint. AK has more than 8 years of experience in security, from managed security services to solutions integrations for a variety of technologies like SIEM and SOAR platforms, EDR, IDS, UBA, and more recently, threat intelligence. AK is joining us from Singapore today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Thanks for taking out the time.
All right, so we are with you live here today. For those of you who are joining us, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will answer those along the way if we can. Additionally, we have a few minutes reserved at the end for a Q&A. So thanks again for taking the time out of your day to join us. And with that, Adrianne, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Daniel, for that introduction. Again, first of all, good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone, wherever you are. And today's topic is going to be uncovering the APAC cyber threat landscape. We're going to have a deep dive onto some of the biggest threats that we're seeing in Cyberint in APAC. So these are the following threats, the top threats of 2023 in APAC, according to what we have seen so far. I know it's not yet the end of 2023. We have a few more months to go. But so far, these are the top threats that we're seeing. So we're going to be discussing each and every one of this. We're going to be splitting this topics between me and AK. But please prepare some questions if you have to. Then type it in the chat. I think we have a chat, right, Daniel? For the questions. If not, we have prepared a session at the end for Q&A. Okay, so we have phishing, we have InfoStealers, we have MFA bypass, we have ransomware, supply chain attacks, hacktivism, and of course, the all too popular generative AI. I'll be talking for a few slides from phishing up to the ransomware, and we're going to be deep diving on each one of these. So first, for the first threat that we have, for the countries that we have for this webinar, we are including a few of these countries in APAC. So if you see your country in here, we have been seeing your country as one of the possibly affected in these top threats that we're going to be discussing. So the first threat that we're going to be talking about is still phishing. I know you guys are all familiar with phishing already. It's one of the most common threats in APAC, in the world. We have seen this threat as a climbing threat. And the trend from 2019 to 2022 is growing up, as you can see here. Yes, there are months that it may have been very stagnant or going down, climbing up, but the trend so far is going up until November of 2022, December of 2022, as you can see here. And for 2022 alone, we have seen almost 5 million phishing attacks. And there's a 150% increase in phishing attacks year on year over the past 4 years. This is according to apwg.org. But with Cyberint, we are seeing the same trend. And there are a lot of vectors that phishing can enter these victims. We have a lot of them in the wild. But so far, for what we are seeing in Cyberint, we have 4 as the major initial vectors for phishing. We have the all too common email phishing, which you might have been receiving as well. We have corporate emails, we have corporate email phishing, we have customer email phishing, and then of course we have smishing. This is about SMS, wherein the threat actor sends SMS for to lure the victim into clicking some kind of malicious link. Also, we have phishing, short for voice phishing, wherein the threat actor or the hacker calls the victim and try to lure him into getting infected or trying to click a link. And the last vector that we have seen, which is kind of growing for the past few months, is social media impersonation. We're going to be talking about some of this in the next slides. The first one, it's the email phishing. You're very, very familiar with this one already. It's the most common vector that we've seen so far. There are several tactics to lure victims when it comes to email phishing. These variations or tactics, the most common one is malicious link, wherein the link may have been hidden behind the picture, that if you click that picture, you'll be redirected to the phishing website, or maybe a text where it says it's a legitimate link, but when you click it, you are actually redirected to a phishing website. And of course, we have malicious attachments, wherein a phishing email that you're going to be receiving has an attachment that is either a malware or a file that contains another link that redirects to a phishing website. And the third one, which is not very common, but it's really very difficult for a lot of security companies to detect, is the variation of asking for a reply. Why is it very difficult for us to detect this one? Is because the actual phishing email that asks for you to reply does not even contain any link, no attachment, nothing suspicious at all. It's just a set of paragraphs, a set of sentences that lures you into sending back a reply. Once the threat actor or the hacker gets a hold of your reply, he knows already that the email that he sent the initial email to is an active email address. And with that, the threat actor can then have a conversation with the victim and try to lure him further into either clicking a phishing link or divulging information or private information. So that's the all too common email phishing now. And then we have also the smishing attacks. This is short for SMS phishing. So threat actors these days, yes, they're using email, but email is a newer technology compared to SMS. And when it comes to email technology, security walls are already in place and are already being developed to protect users from being victimized with email phishing. And threat actors knows that. They know that. So what do? They go to a lower version of technology that they know people still use, which is SMS. It is the weapon of choice for a lot of threat actors in the banking industry. For those bank phishing that you usually hear in the news, you usually see from your email spam folders, SMS spam folders. You usually see those. The reason why threat actors' choice of weapon is smishing is because SMS mass senders is very easily obtainable in the web. They could spend probably $50 for them to be able to send thousands, if not tens of thousands of SMS in just a single click. And as I said a while ago, SMS technology is not that secure because it's very, very old technology. And the security for SMS is not really being developed at the moment. And a lot of people are still using SMS technology. And as another point for this, why threat actors wants to use smishing as the vector for to lure victims is because the victim list is very predictable. When I say very predictable, the threat actor can generate a set of phone numbers without even knowing their names or their email addresses, because it's just a set number of digits that they can create a script or a program to generate that thousands or tens of thousands of victims. It's very easy for them to generate that, very easy for them to get an SMS mass sender. It's very easy for them to uh, uh, send a text email. And of course, a lot of legitimate applications, legitimate corporations also use SMS as their uh, mode of communication. So it is very easy for threat actors for them to lure victims into this. The next one is phishing, which is short for for voice phishing. It is basically the same phishing website that the threat actors wanted to lure the victims to click or to visit, but it's just a different entry point. Instead of an SMS or an email, they actually call the potential victim, and it's very interactive. Why? Because whatever the victim answers during the call, the threat actor can adjust his or her response to the victim to make it more interactive and to actually lure them further into visiting the phishing website. And of course, since these threat actors are already using calling the victims, they can then use the timing for them to log into corporate sites and trigger sending an OTP or an MFA code to the victim, and and control the process and the timing of the phishing attack. It's still very common these days. And the last one for last vector that I want to discuss for phishing is the social media impersonations. For example, here in the Philippines, we are seeing a lot of fake social media pages that are impersonating actual corporations, legitimate corporations. And users or customers of those corporations tend to use the comment section of the let's for this example, let's use a bank. A bank has a social media page, and a lot of their customers use the comment section to ask for help from customer support, and the threat actors are monitoring this comment section. Why? Because they're looking for potential victims that are very desperate to and are asking for help for them to be able to access the services that the bank provides. And these threat actors are using fake social media profiles to send them a personal message or a private message and pretend to be coming from a bank. And they will then offer to help with their exact issue that they reported to the comment page of the legitimate bank. And then they trick the user into either sharing their credentials or clicking a link for them to be able to share again the credentials and the MFA. So that's what we have seen as the initial vector so far for 2023, right? So we have phishing, email phishing, we have smishing, we have phishing, and of course social media impersonations. There are a lot of delivery methods out there, but these are the most common ones that we are seeing as a threat intelligence company. And phishing, we're not seeing signs of it slowing down because phishing is very, very profitable these days. The next threat that I want to talk about are InfoStealers. You are already all familiar with malware, but there's this special kind of malware that has been running around since early 2020, late 2022, early 2021. These are called the information stealers or InfoStealers for short. And what they do is they steal sensitive data from an infected customer and send it to the attacker. Usually, these information that they are stealing are credentials, finance information, your personal information, cookies. If you're into crypto, your offline wallets, a screenshot of your computer, the operating system information. Those are all information that this InfoStealer can steal. And these InfoStealers are very rampant in the wild, that they are being run by gangs that have that are built like an actual corporations. Redline, for example, is a kind of InfoStealer, or a family of InfoStealer that is in the wild for, we've seen it since 2020. And they render their service as malware as a service, because they are actually being run by very professional threat actors. We're in this malware as a service provider. They have CEOs, they have support teams, they have R&D, they have research, they have customer support, tech support, etc. They have a lot of those in their gang, that they are able to provide malware as a service. So this, what you're seeing right now, is the rough method of how another threat actor can avail of the service that is being provided by, let's say for an example, Redline. Redline as a MAAS provider. So Redline, they develop and maintain the malware. They provide the malware to the subscriber, which is another threat actor, and of course they provide support, which this is one of the selling points for them, providing support to whoever subscribes to them. So if another threat actor subscribes to them and obtains the newest InfoStealer version or executable file, when I say newest, this means that this executable file or malware is not yet in the database of any signature base of any antivirus software. They tend to be undetected. So this threat actor can now obtain that newest InfoStealer, and he will then distribute that InfoStealer either via drive-by downloads, phishing that contains malicious attachment, even social media impersonation, asking you to download a file, or maybe malicious website, compromised websites, etc. After they have infected a lot of people, they then collect the malware logs and they sell those logs in the underground market. The thing with this is that these threat actors, if you go back to the previous slide, please, Daniel, thank you. As you can see here, the prices for subscription is very cheap, $49 for a week, up to $999 for a lifetime. And these numbers, maybe for some, is very expensive already, but for threat actors, these are mere cents to them. Because I have seen threat actors subscribe for $150 for a month and have distributed maybe around roughly 10,000 infections or 10,000 malware infections just within that month. And if he is able to sell all those 10,000 malware logs in the underground market for $10 each, how much would that be? That's almost $100,000 of profit, only because of the seed money of $150. So it's a very, very lucrative business for threat actors. If only you have a broken moral, maybe you would find this very lucrative as well. But again, we are on the better side of humanity. So it's good for us to see this. Please. So this is the rough one. And so far in Asia Pacific, these are the top 10 nations that are being targeted by InfoStealers. As you can see here, Vietnam is top 1 and Japan is down at the lower end. Why is Vietnam, India, and Philippines at the top? It's probably because a lot of the victims are your regular people, your regular internet user. They are not aware on how to defend themselves against cybersecurity threats or cyber threats out there. And a lot of these people are not really educated with cybersecurity, and that's why they are easily being lured into clicking or downloading InfoStealers. When it comes to better developed countries like Australia and Japan, a lot of their population are already aware with on how to protect themselves in the internet. So that's why we're seeing a bit lower number of infections. At least that's my theory as a professional in this industry. The most common InfoStealer families in the Asia Pacific we see here, as I've talked about a while ago, is Redline. More than 50% of the infections in APAC are because of Redline family, followed by Aurora and of course Raccoon for number 3. We have a lot more InfoStealer families, but those account for less than 1% for the infections in APAC. And Redline, why are they at the top? Because as I said a while ago, they're run like a company. They have CEOs, CFOs, CTOs. They have teams that specializes on R&D, on research, on marketing and sales, on how to sell their malware to threat actors that can spread them. So that's why they're on the top on this. The next threat that I want to talk about is MFA bypass. We're all familiar with MFA, right? OTP, your 6-digit code, fingerprint, that kind of security wall that is being asked after you input your username and password when you're logging into a system. And we've seen some processes that can bypass MFA. So the first step, if an attacker is going to be targeting to log in into a system, he's going to first gather information of which to target. He gathers this from third-party data breach, public directories, insider information. He gathers email addresses, numbers, and names, if possible. Somewhere that he could send a phishing SMS, phishing email, and whatnot. So he gathers those targets and sends SMS and emails. The victim then opens the SMS or the email and visits the phishing website and enters his credentials. Let's assume that he was lured into clicking it and entering his credentials. The attacker is actually waiting in real time for any of the victims to input their credentials, because the attacker has to input those credentials to the actual website of whatever system they're targeting. Let's for the sake of this example, let's say it's a bank. So the victim opens the SMS or the email and visits the phishing site that imitates the bank, and the victim credentials are being sent to the attacker. The attacker then inputs those creds to the real website of the bank. And the victim, as you see here, is being redirected to a fraudulent 2FA interface asking, hey, you need a 6-digit code to continue with the service. But since the threat actor the threat actor enters the credentials on the real website, this triggers the bank to send the OTP or the code to the victim. And then, of course, the victim receives and enters the legitimate or the genuine 2FA code to the phishing website. The threat actor gets a hold of this, of the stolen 2FA code, and now we'll get to enter that to the actual website. That would then be an account takeover. The attacker now gets a hold of the victim's accounts. Say, for this example, it's a banking account. But it's not that easy for the threat actors. There are a lot of services these days that just not uses 2FA for logging in, but for other internal services. For this specific example, we're talking about the bank. The threat actors' next action would be to send money, right? To steal the money. So when he sends the money to another dummy or dummy account that he owns, the bank will actually ask for another 2FA code. that is where the last box here on the victim's row is going to happen. There's a fake wrong code error that the victim will receive. It says there, hey, you've input a wrong 2FA code, but in reality, it's an actual correct code. But since the threat actor is trying to send money and is being asked again with 2FA, the victim will receive another 2FA code. The victim will think that, hey, I may have inputted the wrong 2FA a while ago, and the bank sent me another one, so I input this one. So the threat actor or the attacker already got a hold of two legitimate 2FA codes and was able to not just log in into the account and take over the account, but also to send money to steal the money that the victim owns. So that's how they bypass MFA these days. There's a lot of ways to bypass MFAs as well. One of them is by stealing the cookies. We've talked about InfoStealers a while ago that can steal cookies. And if you're all familiar with cookies, this is being used by legitimate websites to know that you are still using their services. Because if you're all familiar, when you're logged into your bank, again, just for an example here, if you're logged into your bank, every time you click a link, it doesn't always ask you for your username and password. The reason behind is that the bank knows that you've already logged in once and you're still using their service, so they don't ask you every now and then for your username and password. That is because the cookie here has recorded your session. And if this cookies is if the threat actors or the hacker got a hold of these cookies, they will be able to pretend that they will be able to hijack the session of the victim and no longer need either the credentials or the MFA for them to take over the account. So that's also one of the ways to bypass an MFA. There are other ways. There are things that we have seen for the past year, like threat actors actually reverse engineering Android apps for them to be able to know which API uses the MFA, which API does not. Does it check for hashes and whatnot? There are other ways for threat actors to bypass MFA, but these are the most common ones that we are seeing. The other threat that I want to talk about today is ransomware. We're all too familiar with ransomware. And for globally, we have seen a rising number as well for ransomware. Since 2020 to 2021, it already more than doubled, 105% increase. And during the pandemic, it possibly plateaued 2021 and 2022. But for 2023, so far, this is just the first 3 quarters of 2023. We're already seeing a 30% increase. If this trend, if these numbers are still true by the end of 2023, we're going to be seeing a 70% increase. That's around 4,800 infections. That's globally. Here in APAC, we are seeing a lot of infections in Australia more than the other countries. My theory for this is that Australia, India, and Japan has more companies that are there are more businesses there compared to the other countries, and the more companies, more chances of them to be able to find a vulnerability that they can exploit as an entryway for them to infect with ransomware. And also, one more theory that we have been seeing so far for ransomware gangs is that they tend to study which countries have the more has more capability of paying. So that's where they spread their activities more into. The top 10 industries targeted so far in Asia Pacific is professional services, down to transportation and equipment as the last one. For Asia Pacific, the most common or the most active threat or ransomware group that is targeting us is the Lockbit 3.0, followed by I think there's Clop. And Lockbit, they're very well known. They have a lot of well-known names under their belt that they have victimized. And then I know there are a lot of threat actor or ransomware groups out there that are affecting Asia Pacific, but not as close as what we have been seeing with the top families in here. So these groups, so far, we are seeing them moving towards encryption-less attacks. What does this mean? Because before, there are two methods for extortion. They encrypt the files and they steal the files. This is known as the double extortion. But companies are also improving their security defenses. So they set up backups, daily backups of their system. So once they get encrypted with ransomware, they would just revert to backup. And threat actors know this. And encryption of those files, thousands of files, is a very painstaking process because it has a lot of read-write processes, right? And it's very easy to detect a read-write process within a machine. If you are an AV product and you see one file reading thousands of files in a few seconds and reading and writing, you would probably assume and detect it as a generic ransomware executable file and stop it. And it's very laborious and it's very easy to detect. That's why threat actor groups or ransomware groups are now moving towards encryption-less attacks. They don't encrypt the files, they just steal it. Once they have stolen the file, theft and exfiltration of sensitive data, it would be difficult for the victims to get it back, to get those data back without actually paying. So yes, they are moving towards encryption-less attacks. So I'm going to be passing on the mic to AK to discuss Threat 5 and the others. AK, take it away.
Thanks, Adrian. Yeah, amazing information. Thanks for that. So now to continue with the further attacks, we are going to speak about supply chain. Now, supply chain, based on different studies so far, is a very serious risk now, right? There's been more than 19% of the organizations who were breached because of a supply chain compromise in the year of 2021. And this is now expected to grow massively. And what does supply chain actually mean? It means that if you have any kind of suppliers from a software or a technology perspective, and they have access to your data, eventually, if they are breached, there is a very good chance that the organization's data is also breached or leaked, right? And we saw this very recently with the MoveIt attack, which is a very common um, application used in APAC, right, for different organizations to share data. And more than 60 million individuals were impacted because of this attack. And in the next slide, we are going to deconstruct this and understand exactly what happened in this kind of campaign, right? So it started off with a zero-day vulnerability that MoveIt had. Okay, and of course, the attackers out there are always looking out for any kind of zero-day vulnerability which they found in MoveIt, and they exploited it at a very, very large scale, right? After this, what happened is that in a lot of cases where the customers who were using MoveIt to use different kind of sharing of data got impacted. And it was not just limited to the customers who were using Move It, but even beyond that, right? So in the next step, we will see how this actually led to impacting businesses who were not even a customer of Move It, but just because they had people who were sharing data, sensitive data, which was finally stolen by the threat actors or the bad actors, right? Or we call them cyber criminals in our language. So this happened. Moving on to, we saw that there were other organizations who were hit with ransomware, as Adrian just mentioned about it. And there were a few of them which just had extorted data leak, right? The data was stolen, and that's when bigger concern or a security issue pops in. In the end, we saw it in the media. Once the data breach happened, we saw that so many people globally were affected by this Move It attack. So if we look at this slide, we understand that starting from somebody who has access to your data was breached. And because of this vulnerability or even a ransomware attack, it became a global issue, right? And a lot of different kind of organizations as well as individuals were impacted. So what we understand from a supply chain perspective, every organization has different types of suppliers. Okay, the first one or the most important one would be the suppliers who have privileged access to the organization's data, right? Which means the supplier who is storing different kinds of username passwords to VPN gateways or even your corporate applications, any supplier who is managing API tokens, SSH keys, or even have access to certain source codes. These are very sensitive suppliers. The second one, as we would classify, would be the suppliers that have access to your data. This can be anybody from the marketing, for example, from data analytics platforms, law firms, and of course, nowadays, the most popular ones would be the SaaS suppliers or the cloud suppliers. So if you are using an S3 bucket, for example, or even a blob storage, that's where you are storing your sensitive data to a third party supplier. And this supplier, in the end, poses a risk to you. And the last one would be the suppliers who offer technology, right? Any kind of open source projects or any software or hardware providers. So this is how we classify the suppliers. But what are the problems so far from a traditional approach towards a third party risk, right? Most of the organizations are unaware of the types of suppliers they have, or even the inventory list of the number of suppliers or the vendors that any organization is using. It could be in IT, it could be non IT, it could be from the business side as well. But often we see that there is no vendor management when it comes to larger organizations. The second one would be, how do we do the risk assessment? Every time that we onboard a new supplier in an organization, we do a compliance checklist, right? We look at different kinds of tick boxes to see that this vendor is able to comply in terms of their data security, in terms of their security hygiene. But do we actually look into how this supplier could be breached in the deep and dark web? Okay, what is the overall security posture of this supplier from an external standpoint? And this is why the risk assessments are usually partial in nature and does not give a 360-degree view about the supplier. The last one would be point in time evaluation. What does that mean? So every time that the vendor is onboarded, we do look at the evaluation in that point of time. But what is missing is a continuous monitoring of these suppliers, because the breach can happen after you start using the supplier for your organization. So in the next slide, what we are going to look at is how does this legacy approach changes to what Cyberint is doing to manage third-party risks. So the four boxes that we see are usually the ones that are more important. But from a legacy approach, hygiene and exposure are the two things that people have been looking at from a third party risk management. So hygiene is more into, the things that you can see, usually the website, do they have a valid certificate, any kind of email security issues, are the softwares patched, the services are up to date. These are the things that we can look at, right? The second one would be exposure, which is just checking if there are any kind of open ports or vulnerable ports, interfaces, any kind of hijackable subdomains that the supplier has. So these are the two different boxes that have been used so far, which is more towards the open web or the surface web. The third box that you see is the targeting level, which is something that Cyberint has introduced, and this brings in more information about the supplier. How many active phishing websites can we detect about this supplier, which are out there, right? If there's any kind of impersonation on social media, or how are threat actors talking about this supplier or this third party in the dark web? What kind of chatter can we see? Is there anything that can be malicious and targeting the organization right now? If there's any kind of active campaigns, what's the brand reputation of this supplier on different kinds of forums that Cyberint monitors? So targeting level is the most important one, because this is what we tend to miss. It is usually not from the open web. And how many times do organizations go sweep through the dark web to find out this information? And the last one, of course, is the historical data, which means how many times in the past was this third party breached, any kind of ransomware attacks, or maybe there were any other data breaches that you should be aware of before you make a decision, right? From a business risk, how much risk can this organization um, take in order to have multiple third party suppliers? So the comprehensive risk assessment is to include all the four boxes that we spoke about. All right. So we'll move to the next topic, which is hacktivism. Now, this is an interesting one and is being talked about more and more these days. So, what is hacktivism and how is it actually emerging and becoming a more complicated threat in this world? Right. So, we have three different kinds of hacktivists. Okay. The one is the usual hacktivist groups that we all know about, right? The second one would be the financially motivated cyber criminals. I mean, we all know that in the end, the motive is usually financial gain, right, for the cyber criminals. And then, of course, we have the nation state actors, which are more of the maybe the persistent attacks, or the ones who are usually targeting maybe from a geopolitical angle. So, how do these actually combine together? So, cybersecurity professionals, we consider these three different groups. Okay. One is who just wants to make money. One is who just wants to commit any kind of espionage, which is the nation state actors. And hacktivists would be the ones who generally don't want money, but they are ideologically motivated. And how we see that the landscape is changing is because of the overlap of these three different categories. So once you overlap, and we will see that a few examples in the next few slides. Right. So this is what we have seen very recently, which is again a North Korean government backed up group, right? They stole about $3 billion in a crypto attack over the past few years. And even some of the officials are suggesting that the funds were being used for different kinds of weapons program. Now, this is again how the different kind of hacktivist groups have combined together, okay, from a nation state actor and as well as from the hacktivist group to have a successful attack like this. The next example is from a Chinese organization, an APT group. Okay, they have actually observed doing corporate espionage, stealing intellectual property and trade secrets just for economic gain. And this is another, a real life example that we saw early last year. Another example of how different groups come together for the same end result. The next one would be another attack that we saw from Malaysian hacktivist group, which even though they are not officially associated with the government, but they have a nationalistic attitude, right? And in this case, they targeted some of the Indian government agencies and websites. So now that we see this kind of growth and a combined motive from different kinds of groups, it becomes imperative for all of us to be aware and to find out how we can stop this from growing further. So the next one is generative AI. For everybody who has tried ChatGPT and other AI tools in the past to make their life easier, I think this might be a good topic to go through from a cybersecurity angle as well, right? So to talk about what are the risks related to this kind of applications that we are using now. The first one I would say is looking at your sensitive data. So let's say today you open ChatGPT and maybe you want to type an email and just get the language changed to maybe a more professional language. It's a very simple real life example. But do we actually are cautious that whatever we are uploading to ChatGPT, right? Is there anything sensitive about the business, about the company that we are going to be uploading to ChatGPT, right? And then of course, it's not just about the users, it is also about how these AI tools are being used in the business to make things easier and automate them. And that is where we also tend to forget what kind of limitation do we need to set when it comes to sharing data with an AI platform, right? So spread of sensitive data is happening a lot. There's a lot of prompt injection, which is basically turning artificial intelligence into a bigger threat. And then because there are so many people and businesses who are interacting with AI, the threat actors or the cyber criminals are getting faster in how they attack and how they conduct a successful breach against an organization. So these are the risks that we are looking at. Now, just to show you an example, this is a screenshot from Cyberint UI, where you can see that the rise of ChatGPT actually there's so much hype around it that now it has become a target for the threat actors as well. Okay, what we see here is that if employees are sharing any kind of personal data, your own PII, right, or even business related, company related data on ChatGPT, this could be stolen and can be circulated in different kinds of forums and marketplaces in the dark web. And what you see in the screenshot is exactly the username password of a consumer, of a customer of OpenAI, which is ChatGPT, and how it was leaked, which ended up in the threat actor to find all the information that was uploaded to ChatGPT by this user. So this one compromise actually could have caused a very big damage, not just to the user, but even to the organization. So in the next slide, as we speak about this, right, I will just move to the risk mitigation strategies. So far we spoke about different kinds of threats. Adrian mentioned about phishing, different forms of phishing, ransomwares, InfoStealers and stuff. But how do we actually mitigate the risk? So we are going to talk about this in this section. So these are very high level but strong points when it comes to creating different strategies to mitigate any kind of evolving cyber risks. The first one here is patch management. So I'm sure everybody here on the webinar knows and understands patch management, but it is something that needs to be the focus um, of any kind of vulnerability management perspective, right? As we saw in the movie, as we see in a few other zero-day attacks as well, we learn that not only the attack happens, but we need to understand what were the vulnerabilities and what kind of patch management do we need to do and how do we prioritize this within the organization. The second one would be train your workforce. In an organization, usually the cybersecurity team is less than 5% of the total number of employees, which means most of the people in an organization are not cybersecurity professionals. They don't understand, or maybe they don't have enough awareness about cybersecurity. And that is when we need the workforce to be aware, to be cautious, to be trained with different kinds of attacks or even the attack vectors which are popular these days. Especially as we learned from Adrian, the smishing and wishing and social engineering, these are the common tactics used to attack non cybersecurity professionals, and that is where the training comes in very handy. The third one would be security first culture. Everybody in the organization has to develop a security centric culture, which means cybersecurity comes in first and everything else comes in later. So, this is more of a habit, an attitude, or even a mindset change that we all need to bring in within our organizations. The fourth one would be monitoring your assets. And assets basically means anything and everything that the organization owns, right? Your laptops, your IPs, your firewalls, your external facing or internet facing assets, your digital assets, basically the ones that are visible to the threat actor from the outside. These are the ones that we need to protect and monitor. And we need to know how many assets or how big is the digital footprint of the organization. The fifth one would be to leverage threat intel, because usually as humans we only use open web, right? And we rarely go into the dark web. Dark web is just like a very big ocean, right? The more you dig, the more you find. And how many phishing sites do we actually monitor today? How much of social media impersonation can we find? All of you, I would urge you to open your Facebook and search for your organization that you're working in. And I'm very confident that you will find multiple pages and fake profiles of your organization on just one platform, which is Facebook. And there are so many out there right now. All of this digitalization and the spread that we have makes it imperative for every organization to leverage threat intelligence to be able to get all the information and know what exactly should be the next step. And last one, managing the third party risk. We spoke about it in depth. Supply chain is extremely important. Vendor consolidation and management is extremely important. So I would urge all of you to make sure, be cautious and aware of the different kinds of suppliers that you have, and how are you doing a continuous monitoring for these suppliers within your organization. These are some high level strategies that I wanted to share. And this is just the conclusion of the webinar, where we speak about how does Cyberint help to fill in all of these gaps that we saw so far from a four pillars perspective. We look into threat intelligence, which is the open, deep, and dark web monitoring. We look into attack surface, which is your digital footprint, managing everything which is external facing, all the vulnerabilities, open issues, misconfigurations from an external perimeter perspective is the attack surface management. The third one is DRPS, as everybody calls it, which is the digital risk protection, looking at how much risk do you have from a digital standpoint, how many phishing active website, how many social media impersonation, your VIPs, your C levels, are they being impersonated on different platforms? So This is how we can monitor the DRPS. And lastly is the supply chain intelligence to bring in the visibility and the awareness as well as the risk that you have on your suppliers. On top of this, Cyberint does offer remediations in terms of takedowns and how can we actually get the phishing sites down, remove all the fake pages on social media. And of course, from an operational perspective, we offer third party integrations with the multiple security products that you might be using within your organization to have a better yet comprehensive solution to protect yourself. And lastly, I will just take maybe 30 seconds to talk about the expert threat intelligence that we have, including Adrian and everybody in Cyberint is very dedicated and focused towards helping our customers to mitigate as much risk as possible and to provide actionable intelligence. And this is where the experts from Cyberint come in to help our customers do investigations and contextualization of alerts and also look at how targeted and true positive alerts and findings can Cyberint offer to our customers. So right on time, that's about it. If anybody has any questions, any kind of comments, please feel free to ask.
Thank you so much, Adrian and AK. That was really a fantastic presentation, and I feel like I learned a lot just following along. So thank you both. And as AK said, if there's any questions, please feel free to just drop those into the chat and we'll be happy to answer. Okay, I see one question coming in about AI, about generative AI. As threat actors continue to adopt AI tools, what changes do you expect to see in the threat landscape?
Very interesting question. So as more and more that we adopt AI, right, as I mentioned in my presentation before, there's a boon and a bane to every technology, right? And with AI, it's the same. All we need to do is to be very, very cautious on how we incorporate AI into our lives. But of course, as we grow and as we adopt this more and more, threat actors will find ways to get the data or even the AI tool that you're using can be breached, right? Or the threat actor can do an account takeover of your account on the AI tool, or even from a business standpoint, to get access to everything that has been shared so far. So I would say the landscape is going to change tremendously, and we will see this happening in the next few years as this becomes more popular. But all we have to do now is awareness and to be extremely cautious on how do we incorporate this into our lives right now.
Thank you. Definitely. I think those are some great points, AK. Thank you. We have another one. Do you have threat intelligence for special, I believe this is special territories. So maybe Adrian, you can answer this one.
Yes, for special territories, you mean by region? If you mean by region, yes, we're monitoring specific threat actors from those known places or known regions that they're coming from, especially in Eastern Europe and of course in Asia Pacific region. And it's a very comprehensive or a very big intelligence that it would take me a lot of time just to discuss this. But of course, if you want to discuss this even further on a deeper level, let me know via email, maybe, Daniel.
Sure. Mirawati, feel free to reach out to myself or Adrian or just we'll be more than happy to walk you through the type of threat intelligence we can provide, in particular for specific regions and territories. And we have one more question. Why are InfoStealers becoming more common, and what factors are driving the increase? So maybe that can be another question for you, Adrian.
Yeah, of course. So yes, we have seen an increase actually during the pandemic. The reason behind is that the threat actors know that a lot of people are using their devices to work from home, from remotely, and with that, they are actually exposing company information via working from home, and that triggered the threat actors to distribute these info stealers and steal company data for them to use. That's why we've seen a lot of growth in the InfoStealer industry.
All right, thank you, Adrian. So we're right at the top of the hour here. If there's any other questions,
I
we
think
can
there's
hang on
one
for
more,
just.
Daniel.
Oh, I do see one more. Yes.
Yeah,
In your
there's one more.
opinion, what are the most common and dangerous methods recently used to spread info stealers?
Yeah, the most common one is still phishing, malicious email. That's still one of the most common ones. The most dangerous ones, I think, are downloads from infected websites or compromised websites. Not really. Sometimes they're not really compromised, but actually targeted websites, wherein victims tend to search via Google, via other search pages. They search for cracks. They search for hacks and cheats for them to bypass paid services, and they end up on these compromised or malicious websites, and that's when they get infected with fake apps, which are in hindsight info stealers. That's the most dangerous one, at least these days, because a lot of the younger ones are now into uh, the technology, using the internet in their daily lives, and also in the gaming industry, online gaming industry. They tend to these kids, these younger people are they tend to